Oh, thank you. So after some great discussions around sustainability within the industry yesterday, we're excited to continue these conversations as we all know there's a lot of work to be done.
As new trends emerge and different styles of travel grow in popularity, it's important that we step back and take the time to ensure that as an industry, we're working together to grow both responsibly and sustainably.
For this next session, we are excited to bring together travel professionals and representatives of Indigenous tourism organizations to discuss the challenges that Indigenous people face and tackle the ways to make Indigenous tourism more responsible and sustainable. To help lead us in this conversation, we would like to welcome back to the stage TourRadar's Director of Partnerships, Kimberly Sturdivant-Wasson.
Hey, Turvetuloa. Bonjour et bienvenue. Kwe Atara. Hello and welcome. For the next 30 minutes, I promise you a fun and informative chat about a topic that is growing increasingly important, and that is of Indigenous tourism. So what is this buzzword that we keep hearing about? Well, today I have with me to discuss this Sébastien Dagnonet-Picard, Vice President of Operations for the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada. Sébastien is a member of the Huron-Wendat Nation and is a proud Indigenous person and former family chief in his own community. Sébastien is also a strong member of the ITAC team working to achieve a prosperous Indigenous tourism industry. He replaces Keith Henry, who was not able to join us today. Kwe Ataro. Anina Sandberg is the founder of Visit Natives, which promotes sustainable Indigenous tourism with respect for local culture and the environment. Travelers booking her tours experience the daily lives of Sami people and explore the Arctic nature. Her company offers authentic Lapland tours with a blend of traditional and modern Sami culture. Hey, Turvetuloa. And last but not least, please welcome Aurélie Dubouchière, Europe agent at WINTA, the World Indigenous Tourism Alliance. Aurélie is a specialist in Indigenous tourism and a creator of Native Immersion, building innovative promotional solutions for Indigenous stories to be shared. She inspires and educates travelers about Indigenous cultures and encourages them to live their own immersive stories in their native land. Bonjour et bienvenue. So let's get started. Sébastien, I'll start with you. What is Indigenous tourism and why is it growing?
And I just want to start off with saying sorry for my background. I'm in Ottawa Hotel, so apologies for that. And also apologizing for Keith Henry, who couldn't be here with you guys today. So he sent his regrets as he was traveling. Well, Indigenous tourism for us is more than just storytelling, powwows, and events. It's sharing our authenticity, sharing our culture, which is based on ownership, which is based, as well on the way we've survived on the land for centuries. For us, we've seen a big shift in the trend. We've seen a lot of people now with COVID wanting to escape, wanting to be out on the bush, out on nature, discovering medicinal plant, learning about Indigenous culture. And I think there's been this big shift that we have encountered. For us, as you mentioned, it's been trendy, and being trendy, a lot of people are always trying to steal that trend away. Which is a bit unfortunate. And it's not because you're planting a teepee in the backyard of your home that makes you an Indigenous experience. So we got to, continue to raise awareness, continue to build on the trend, and continue to deliver high, authentic Indigenous experiences that is recognized both, on the national level to international levels. And we continue to work with, travel operators, travel trade, receptive agents, just to make sure that they understand the authenticity, understand how to better sell Indigenous experiences. It is based out of our value, and it's based out of, what the communities and the elders wants to see us share. So we got to continue, and tourism goes beyond just having visitors coming to see us. It's a circuit. It's it's the artists selling their music. It's the musician, selling their pieces as well. It's also with the elders that are taking part of reconciliation and teaching what the horrendous pieces of the history of Canada has been. So Indigenous tourism is wide. It's culinary, it's wineries, it's a lot of things you guys can think of. We just got to break some of the cliche that exists still in our modern world.
We'll get into that in just a little bit. Arlie, I know you also had some things to add here too.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Indigenous tourism is also more than an emerging niche market. It's a specific paradigm where Indigenous rights, sovereignty, and their relationship with the land are at the heart of the business model. And to me, it's important to understand that Indigenous tourism has as many realities as there are Indigenous nations with historical and cultural differences. And Indigenous tourism has also that specific purpose in building back relationship between humans and the natural world. And we can see the seek for meaningful travel, which is bringing travelers to more conscious practice of the tourism experiences with a taste for cultural and also spiritual connection with people and land. And I think that Indigenous tourism had that potential to restore the understanding of the natural rules to Indigenous and non-Indigenous people who are ready to learn and experiment harmonious old ways of interconnection.
Yeah, you mentioned that it's more than just an emerging niche market, which I think is a really important sentiment right there. So as we see the rise of Indigenous tourism and this desire to see authentic, original Indigenous peoples, it can be problematic. So how can travelers make sure they're really booking an Indigenous tour and not just being marketed one? Are any operators doing a really good example of this?
I can say that a tourist must make sure that their tour is not set up, because authentic Indigenous tourism is always majority owned, operated, and or managed respectfully and thoughtfully by Indigenous people. So travelers need to ensure that they trip directly engage Indigenous people. I think it's good to ask the tour operator or travel agency for more details about the trip if there is any concern that the travel experience is not benefiting Indigenous people. I would look for transparent tour operators and agencies who inform their customers about the issue openly.
And Sebastian, I think you had something to add to that.
Oh yeah, for sure. And to expand a bit on what Anina just mentioned, other than ownership, it's also very important that the communities are also developing or working with the elders of the community and to make sure the right content is being shared and it's okay to the communities to share. And we have a lot of knowledge about, for example, medicinal plant that we often don't really sell to tourists because we want to make sure that it's something that is kept and the land doesn't get or doesn't see too many people coming and trying to exploit. For example, Labrador tea is a proper example. So and so we always are trying to keep that. And since we come from a very oppressive system, where pride of the Indigenous people was taken away, we couldn't really speak for ourselves, when we were young. So now we have this saying in Canada that it's not about us without us, and we got to make sure that we continue to elevate that speech because everyone wants to speak for ourselves, but only us have control over the stories that we want to tell. And only us can tell that story diligently. So we want to make sure that, it goes back to my example for having a teepee in your backyard. Yeah, okay, you may be able to build a teepee, but can you tell the right story? Can you tell the story of your people? Can you tell the trauma? Can you tell the everything that happened? Can you tell the positive? Have you ever been raised in Indigenous communities? Can you talk about that story? So I think it's very important that we have the right people, and that's
Gotta love live. Are we back? Okay. I think we lost you there for Sebastian, but what I took away from that was that it's important to make sure that your trip directly engages Indigenous people. But with that being said, what concerns do the Indigenous people have about tourism that travelers should really be aware of? How do they share their culture without compromising their integrity? And Nina, I'll let you kick that one off for us.
When Indigenous tourism is done correctly, it respects the traditions of Indigenous people. And when it is managed and run by Indigenous people, the hosts decide what part of their culture is shown to the travelers and what parts are not. It includes every aspect of the culture, like rituals, rites, food, songs, etc. And travelers instead need to respect the hosting community's privacy. For example, they should not step inside the house without permission or taking pictures without asking.
And Aurelie, I know when you and I spoke, you had some interesting things to share here as well.
Yes, so in some situations also the search of travelers for spiritual experiences can also trouble the traditional habits of Indigenous communities, and this is caused by the business opportunities. And it's important to maintain the integrity of the tourism experience, and so operators and travelers have to accept that there are boundaries and not force Indigenous peoples to market the sacred. And you can see that during specific ceremonies, Indigenous people set and explain rules to limit the theft of their intellectual and spiritual properties, usually happening with, for example, unexpected photos, videos, or sound recording that are things that we see on the field. And so to avoid those situations, Indigenous communities can develop trustful relationships with operators that are WINTA, the World Indigenous Tourism Alliance, supporters, and so act like shields to enable bookings for respectful travelers.
To add on to that, how do we evaluate that what we're doing, what you all are doing within the Indigenous tourism industry is having a real positive impact? Do you have any specific examples that you can share with us?
I think yes, thanks. I think it's essential to evaluate Indigenous tourism to make sure it positively impacts the local community. The positive impact of Indigenous tourism can be evaluated by measuring the success of travel experiences. It can be done by gathering information from the Indigenous communities that host travelers. For example, personal success stories are great examples of collecting data and providing a glimpse into how Indigenous tourism experienced. One example is our Sami reindeer herder host Nils, who lives in the Sami village of Kautokeino in northern Norway, who needed to drive an ambulance to enable him financially to continue the reindeer herding tradition. When he started to host travelers with visit natives in his home in Arctic wilderness, he could give up the ambulance driving extra work and concentrate on what he loved, reindeer herding. So Indigenous tourism gave him an economic support to be a full-time herder and pass the tradition to his children. So it's not only about making profit, it keeps the Indigenous lifestyle and traditions alive.
I think I've heard all three of our speakers today talk a lot about nature and the environment. And so I want to switch gears a little bit and hear what role does ecotourism play in the Indigenous tourism and travel world, and how can travelers stay informed about whether their experience is true or was it responsible for the displacement of Indigenous people in their land?
Conflicts over Indigenous land are the main issue faced by Indigenous people worldwide. The principal current Western meaning of nature is very static and passive, where humans are separated from nature. But it appears to be relatively rare and recent concept. But nature is much more than just animals, forests, trees, and landscapes. Nature is us. Ecotourism is created by modern Western conservation concept that doesn't exist similarly in indigenous cultures and beliefs. In indigenous cultures, nature has more holistic and dynamic meaning. For example, indigenous people instead share, not spare the nature. They see themselves as part of the nature, like animals or non-organ objects like trees or mountains. They are the real stewards of our planet. So ecotourism and indigenous tourism cannot be separate things. But because the current nature conservation is still rooted in these Western beliefs, it has led to cultural conflicts in conservation. I think we need to rethink the concept of nature itself and educate travelers about different ways of capturing nature. I love to refer here to essential thinking of anthropology. Like everything we see and believe is based on cultural values we live in. And the Western way of living is just one among many others. So traveling is learning and understanding other cultures.
That it's really interesting what the panelists are, what you all are saying today, and you all have very similar sentiments. So how can travel trade media operators support indigenous tourism and awareness and education? How can we help them make sure that they're marketing it appropriately?
We can quote the example of Native Immersion, which is an experimental platform that has developed a system those past 10 years to prepare travelers before living a deep cultural experience in indigenous communities. And the goal is there to bring people understand the local protocols, learn the basics of indigenous language, and also know the hosting community and have a first virtual contact with them before leaving. And all of that are offered in the Conscious Traveler Kit, really to avoid the cultural misbehaviors. And that platform also provides like media collections, like photos and videos for communication and advertising that have been created with the consent of the indigenous locals, which is very important. And purchasing images or stock platforms can lead to identity theft, image exploitation, and also contribute to non-violence against indigenous people. And this is a real situation we have lived with Maasai people. And so the operators and media have to make efforts in checking those points before marketing.
Sebastian, when you and I spoke, I know you spoke in detail about what you're doing at ITAC with your scorecard, and I wonder if you can share some information there.
Yeah, I think I'm frozen, so I'm hoping you guys can hear me. Unfortunately, we power outage. That was awesome. No, for us, like in Canada, we have organized a what we call we're Indigenous-led organization. So we've provided on Destination Indigenous, which is our main platform that people can go and connect to, is destinationindigenous.ca. We have created media style guides for our media and our partners and tools for the industry to better understand the Indigenous reality and the complexity. We do invite travel trade to be part of the change, to be proactive in the promotion of Indigenous experiences that are certified. And sorry, I cut earlier, but we have developed a RISE certification that certified Indigenous tourism businesses that are authentic and owned by Indigenous operators across the country. And that's a sign that we want to try to implement to a worldwide phase at some point as well, if our partners from different countries are willing to go down that road. We call this the original because we are the only original people selling the most original businesses in the world. So welcome to the home of the original. But we got to continue for us, like just to educate our travel agents to make sure that the way they sell Indigenous experiences is to the values of Indigenous people. Continue to highlight the diversity of experience in the work and especially the access. Not everyone understands the access to get to an Indigenous community. So sometimes visitor can come in and be disappointed or might think that it's far away. Canada is a huge country, so that might be one of the issues. Indigenous tourism is like we said, like it's pretty diverse, right? It could be from an hour Indigenous walk in the park with an elder to a 7-day, like caribou herding in the Arctic. So it's very diverse, but we need to have travel, trade, and media to be mindful of, the way they sell the experience and the way they promote. Aurélie talked about, images. Well, when you put a person in a regalia as your selling picture, and the person comes into Canada and doesn't see a regalia, well, it creates, like disappointment, frustration, because that's not what he's expecting. So I think we got to be mindful of the way we promote it, the way we sell it. Indigenous culture is, for me, way more than feathers and colors. It's really about the in-depth knowledge that we have from the land and what we can accomplish, and the diversity of experiences on the land. And it's the time that we'll take to explore stories together. We don't want it to be like a 10 to 2 and then like no time for breaks, because you know what, if you stop and you see a bear, then you want to stop and talk about the bear and talk about the stories of the bear. So don't have a stiff schedule, leave space for spontaneous content to emerge. And yeah, just be careful on the way we are all creating those expectations to clients. I think it's very important. So it's for us, the more you'll give space to the Indigenous storytellers, the more they will open up on their own personal stories, and the better gain you'll have. And you have to also remember that in Canada, there's over 52 different Indigenous languages. So most of our people are actually English language second or third, depending on where you are. So Inuktitut would be first language, English second, French third. So sometimes there's delays. Sometimes there's also, it's not as fluent as you would want it to be, but you'll gain way more by just holding on. And that creates also that little weight, create that extra special attention to the experience.
Yeah, so all of us in this room and online, we're all travelers, and not only do we sell our product and market our product to travelers, but we travel ourselves. So, what are the ways that we as travelers can support Indigenous tourism? We talked a lot about the sellers, but as the consumers, what can we be doing? And we'll start with Sebastian.
Sorry. We certainly want visitors to be more informed about authentic Indigenous experiences. That are obviously owned and operated by Indigenous communities and entrepreneurs. There needs to be benefits and understanding of the benefits of for the sectors through the economy for Indigenous people. We need people to be more conscious on what they're purchasing. Making sure it's authentic. Don't buy it for the price. Buy it because you're buying this because you understand that it's a deeper story to the piece you are purchasing. It's a story that you're purchasing. It's not only a hotel that has 4 cement walls. It's more than that. It's deeper than that. So there's a story behind it. We need to be breaking all the cliches of past videos that we've seen in different countries, with the cowboy and the Indians. We still got to break that. But for us in Canada, we have a strong, vibrant Indigenous culture deeply embedded in the fabric of our country. People can now understand the heritage of this country by taking the time to really relax, learn, and understand. And, for me, another very strong way and a path to reconciliation, although reconciliation has lost a lot of its meaning because of people just wanting to appropriate that word. But another strong way to support is, by learning, by buying Indigenous books from different Indigenous author, Indigenous music, watching Indigenous films, and just educating yourself. You'll better understand the reality and what our people have gone through. And after that, you'll be able to better connect. And when you come to this country, when you come to the home of the original, we'll make sure you have one of the best time in your life.
Sounds amazing. I can't wait. Aurélie, a few words from you.
Yes, as Sebastian said, there is a potential of education and reconciliation, but also expanding the experience with intercultural experiences, which are also another important aspect of indigenous tourism. And the World Indigenous Tourism Alliance has carried the concept of indigenous earth guardians for years to champion the significance of indigenous ancestral knowledge on protecting the planet. And in 2023, Native Immersion will open a 21-day cultural encounter for Indigenous people from Canada who have asked for a cultural experience. So they are Innu and Cree people from Quebec and would like to meet the Tsatan people in Mongolia because they have a common story with the reindeer. And so they would like to talk about that and exchange knowledge around their relationship with the animal, and also discuss the safeguard of traditional practice. So we can see that indigenous tourism can also be something different, and there is some room for Western travelers to participate to it. And they can directly participate to the next edition that would be mixing indigenous and non-indigenous travelers, and that will help to support a long-term relationship between indigenous communities.
We're running short on time, but keeping with this year's theme, now what? I'd love to hear from one of you. Now what? What should we look for in the future with Indigenous tourism? And Anina, maybe you can close since Aurélie and Sebastian had the last point.
Yeah, I just would like to say at the end that when I founded Visit Natives, the first location I started to work with was the Sami reindeer herder community in Kautokeino in northern Norway. It's a very small Sami village with rich Sami culture and traditions, but not found by so many travelers. And when I look for the future, I'm so happy that our Sami families have directly hosted travelers in their homes and welcoming people in their lives for the last 4 years. We have created an incredible travel concept and authentic experiences that are brand new in the tourism industry where we are. So we are proud to continue our work to give a voice to the Sami, who are the European Union's last indigenous people, and create tourism that has a deeper purpose.
Well, thank you all so much. We are running out of time. I promised a lively chat, and wow, I know I'm personally blown away. And I think if there's one thing that I took away from this session today, it's that if managed correctly and in a respectful manner, and Indigenous tourism can be an opportunity for Indigenous people to show travelers their culture, their nature, their traditions to those who really want to learn about it. So I thank all of my panelists today for your time.